Hello. This is sort of ironic. Some years ago, the Labour MP Jess Phillips was at the centre of an internet abuse storm, which I shall discuss with the appropriate language as soon as I've crossed the YouTube threshold for that sort of thing. Meanwhile, I'll tell you that Jess Phillips has now been attacked by Elon Musk, who has called her naughty names, seeing that she has decided it would be completely unnecessary to set up a national commission of inquiry into the grooming gang scandal. If you want my opinion, well, I suppose you do, seeing as you're watching this. If you want my opinion, I was very surprised that the opening statement of her rejection of such a national inquiry didn't start with her quacking "I got to look here" in Keir Starmer's voice before he got into character operating the ventriloquist dummy which Jess Phillips appears to have become. And I'm not a ventriloquist dummy, I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. Got to look gear, got to look gear, got to look gear. So, the story is as follows. Both Labour and Conservative governments have expended a fair amount of energy in suppressing information as much as they could about the rape gangs in the UK. The Pakistani rape gangs, to be precise. Well, the Muslim Pakistani rape gangs, to be even more precise, and therein lies the problem. Labour have a good deal of support from the Pakistani Muslims and were unwilling to scupper that with a minor detail of bad behaviour. The Conservatives got little, or still get little, support from the Pakistani Muslims in general, but were unwilling to start what they were most afraid of, which would be a sort of green-red alliance of civil unrest, which they obviously believed would result from the sort of mass arrests that would be necessary to deal with this. And I suspect that they were sort of fairly accurate about that. Not that that should have stopped them. So that's not an excuse. Anyway, and I should think also that both sides, there was another factor, which would be avoiding the embarrassment of being known to have let in such criminals to commit these crimes in the first place. So, news about these various appalling things news has dribbled out. It would have to dribble out, but it was very carefully curated, so the problems appeared to be in isolated pockets in just a few towns here and there. Without doubt, and this is another excuse that is not really an excuse, without doubt there was also the problem that the Home Office seems to have been staffed by people who wish to hide some of the worst incidences from the ministers whom they were supposed to inform. This would be the fault of Tony Blair, of course. What isn't? Because he deliberately politicised the civil service in favour of the Labour Party, a development which Gordon Brown continued, and he left as his legacy the 2010 Equality Act, which made much of employing people with what were called protected characteristics, which is not being a human being, but age, disability, trans, maternity, race, religion, sex and sexual orientation, which over the years ensured the placement in the civil service of many people with an agenda. So it isn't surprising that some of them would have been hiding unpleasant truths from their bosses. Not that I'm excusing the bosses, by the way. They were elected to be smarter than that. OK, so back to Miss Phillips. In 2016, a chap called Carl Benjamin, who'd become famous as Sargon of Akkad, starting out in the gaming world really, but he'd become more well known on the web. He'd tweeted a tweet at Jess Phillips, and the tweet was as follows: "I wouldn't even rape you." This insult was sparked by an incident in Parliament. During a parliamentary committee, an MP called Philip Davis brought up the subject of men's issues, and specifically of the growing problem of male suicide. Well, as he was talking about this, Jess Phillips laughed out loud. Not just a little titter, a sort of a real loud laugh. And quite frankly, it seemed to me it was the sort of laugh you do for effect. When Davis asked her what she found so amusing, she said she didn't care about men's issues and would not care about men's issues until all women have parity with men. It was a disgraceful, insensitive reaction to the very real problem of suicide of young men. And I feel quite personal about that because a good friend of mine, her son committed suicide. And she walked into the flat and found him hanging there. And when Jess Phillips laughs, I felt a great deal of ill will towards her, I can tell you. And I don't believe she's ever apologised for that laugh either. If you know anything to the contrary, then let me know in the comments. But at the time, she certainly defended her callous and flippant attitude most robustly. And Benjamin responded to it in a nasty and flippant way, like the gamer that he was. It wasn't nice, and he has since apologised. But I have to say that at the time, I did think that, well, he was threatening her with what he wouldn't do. And I suspect that if Miss Phillips had shot back a personal insult to him, which I rather think is what he thought she'd do, that was a sort of gaming thing, those sort of insults. They called it banter. I called it terrible, but they did that. Anyway, if she'd have done something just as nasty back to him, the whole thing would have been over and done with. However, the fact is that Benjamin was getting some political notice at the time, and he had gathered quite a following of disgruntled young men with his trenchant anti-feminist views. So I suspect that Phillips, or even her party bosses, thought it was politically expedient to accuse him of issuing a threat, rather than what he was really doing, which was issuing a personal insult. And again, I'm not sure that was Phillips' that came entirely from Phillips. I suspect it came from the people behind her. And of course, the BBC made a huge fuss about it. And Phillips herself made much of the horror she felt at that insult. It rocked her world, she said. It was a terrible thing. And yet, now, when thousands of young girls are living with the trauma of having undergone the sort of treatment that Carl Benjamin said he wouldn't do, Jess Phillips is somewhat less accommodating. So here, Oldham Council's Labour group agreed to support a new independent inquiry last year and wrote twice to Miss Phillips to urge her department to throw its weight behind this work. But in a reply revealed by GB News last week, she said it was for Oldham Council alone to decide whether to hold such an investigation, rather than for the government to intervene. And again, this is one of those things where I mentioned before, Oldham Council can have its inquiry, and then maybe Telford, and maybe Manchester, and maybe Oxford, and maybe any one of the other towns that are involved. In this way, it's not one big thing, it's little bits dribbling out the same way as news of the atrocities dribbled out. So anyway, this was her response. And then she got a tweet, or actually now rather an X, from no less a person than Elon Musk. Elon Musk called her a rape apologist. And now, Jess Phillips says, it's turned my world upside down. You couldn't make it up, could you? All right. Till next time, you can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.